You know, usually when we talk about buying something online, there's this expectation of magic almost, like teleportation.
Right.
You just sit on your couch, you click buy on, I don't know, a cheap phone case or a sweater from halfway across the world, and like 3 days later, it just magically appears on your doorstep.
Exactly.
For you listening, that process probably feels completely borderless.
Well, it feels that way because for the consumer, the friction has been deliberately hidden.
Yeah.
But the mechanics making that illusion possible are uh, currently undergoing the most radical transformation we've seen in decades.
And that is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Our mission for you today is to demystify this massive, complex overhaul of global shipping, e-commerce, and customs regulations that are taking effect right now in 2026.
It's a lot to cover.
It is, because that teleportation machine, it is officially broken. We're looking at a global logistical landscape that has basically hit a massive bureaucratic wall.
Yeah, and we have a really fascinating stack of sources to draw from to understand this shift.
We really do.
We're synthesizing official EU and Spanish tax agency manuals, deep logistics industry reports, customs brokerage guides, e-commerce forum discussions, and international shipping protocols.
It's a literal mountain of paper, but it paints an incredibly vivid picture. The era of clicking buy on a cheap international item and having it just grease through customs is over.
Completely over.
So let's start with the macro picture. The European Union is completely redesigning its digital borders. And the catalyst for this isn't some abstract policy goal, right? It's a sheer, unbelievable tsunami of cheap imports.
Exactly. I mean, if we look at the data from 2024, 4.6 billion items valued under 150 euros entered the European Union.
Wow.
And a staggering 91% of those originated from China.
4.6 billion, just to visualize that for you listening, that's more than 10 individual packages for every single man, woman, and child living in the EU every single year.
It's just an unimaginable scale. And traditional customs systems were simply not engineered to process that volume of, individual low-value microshipments.
Right.
Picture a physical customs agent at an airport trying to verify the declared value of 3 million separate $2 plastic rings arriving on a single cargo plane.
That's impossible.
The system effectively collapsed under its own weight. And more importantly, because these items were coming in under the historic 150 euro threshold, they were totally exempt from customs duties.
Which is a massive loophole.
Huge. It allowed for widespread tax fraud through underdeclaring values, and it created this incredibly unfair competitive environment for local EU sellers who, were paying taxes on everything.
Okay, let's unpack this. To stop the bleeding, the EU Council approved what essentially looks like a toll booth on the digital highway.
That's a good way to put it.
Starting July 1st, 2026, there is a flat €3 tariff on e-commerce parcels under 150 euros. But I have to push back here. A €3 fee sounds like a minor annoyance. Does a flat €3 toll really kill the era of the €2 phone case? Or is this just, I don't know, a minor speed bump for massive global marketplaces?
Well, to see the impact, we really have to look at how that €3 fee is actually applied. It is not a flat fee per box.
Oh, it isn't?
No, this tariff applies to each distinctly different item in a shipment for sellers registered in the Import One-Stop Shop.
The iOS.
Exactly, the iOS, which covers about 93% of all e-commerce.
Wait, let me make sure I'm getting this math right. If I go onto a massive marketplace and I put a €2 phone case, a €3 pair of socks, and a €1 plastic ring into my digital shopping cart.
That's 3 different items.
Right, so I'm hit with 3 separate €3 fees.
Yes. Your €6 worth of cheap goods suddenly carries €9 in newly applied tariffs.
Oh my God.
So that brings your total to €15. It fundamentally alters the psychology of the consumer. It changes behavior by destroying the underlying math of ultra-cheap impulse buying.
That is a massive shift. It turns a casual browse into a highly calculated purchase.
And what's really fascinating here is that this €3 flat rate is actually just a temporary plug.
Wait, really? Temporary?
Yeah. The ultimate goal, scheduled for 2028, is the complete elimination of that €150 tariff exemption entirely.
Wow.
It'll be managed through a new EU customs data hub. So by 2028, normal variable tariffs will apply from the very first euro you spend.
So the era of the free pass is just entirely over. But practically speaking, how do you even enforce that?
It's a huge logistical challenge.
Right, because we're talking about transitioning from the rules themselves to the actual technology and paperwork required to make this happen. If physical customs agents were overwhelmed before, how do you process millions of packages a day in 2026 without gridlocking airports with unimaginable amounts of paperwork?
Well, you do it by radically simplifying the data requirements for the vast majority of packages.
Mm-hmm.
And simultaneously, you shift the burden of data collection away from the physical border and onto the digital platforms themselves. Enter the newly standardized Simplified Declaration Form, known as the H7.
Yeah, I was looking at the actual H7 paperwork in the sources, and it's a huge departure from the old system. Traditionally, bringing commercial goods into the EU required a single administrative document.
The DUA, yes.
Right, which is an incredibly dense, complex filing. But this new H7 declaration is specifically built for low-value goods under 150 euros, and it requires 3 times less data than the old standard. It's just built for pure speed.
It is the grease in the wheels of this new bureaucratic machine. And it ties directly into that IO system we mentioned earlier.
How so?
Well, the Import One-Stop Shop allows platforms to calculate and collect the necessary taxes at the exact moment you click buy. Because the tax is already handled digitally at the point of sale, the physical package can bypass local customs charges upon delivery.
That makes sense. But I was digging into these customs brokerage guides, and they explicitly carve out huge exceptions. Like, you cannot use this fast-track H7 form for everything.
No, absolutely not.
It's strictly prohibited for goods requiring border controls. No pharmaceuticals, no protected wildlife or flora under CITES. And surprisingly, no electronics with batteries.
Yeah, the battery exception is a perfect example of policy colliding with physical reality.
Right, the WEEE and RoHS directives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anything classified as e-waste or containing hazardous materials requires full, traditional customs clearance. The fire risks associated with shipping cheap, unregulated lithium-ion batteries in the cargo holds of passenger planes.
Right, they can literally catch fire.
Yeah. Combined with the environmental nightmare of disposing of them, it just means they lose their fast-track privileges.
Makes total sense.
But to make this highly automated fast-track system work for your basic T-shirts or books,
Yeah.
customs agencies need to know exactly who is buying what.
Huh.
And this brings us to a massive global trend.
Tying e-commerce directly to your national identity.
Exactly.
This was one of the most surprising elements in the stack of research for me. There's a reference to how Amazon operates in Peru as a parallel.
Right. It's a great comparison.
If you buy something on Amazon Peru, you are legally required to provide your national ID, your DNI, which physically limits you to 3 imports a year up to $2,000.
Yeah.
Or you have to provide a registered business tax ID, a RUC, for unlimited imports. And now the EU is doing something very similar. The new H7 declaration absolutely mandates the inclusion of the recipient's Spanish tax ID, the NUF.
It is the complete digitization of the recipient.
Mm-hmm.
For decades, you were just a shipping address to the Postal Service. Now, you are a registered taxpayer receiving imported goods tracked on a centralized ledger.
But let's bring this down to real life for you listening. What if I'm sending a simple birthday gift to a friend who lives in Spain?
Right, a private package.
I don't know their tax baby. Most people don't know their friends' government tax numbers. Does the package just get rejected at the border and bounce back to me?
This raises an important question about how rigid digital systems handle the messiness of human life.
Seriously.
And I always find it fascinating how massive bureaucracies have to engineer loopholes for simple practicality.
Oh, they definitely do.
According to the Canary Islands tax agency guidelines included in our sources, there is a specific workaround for exactly this scenario. Authorized transport companies can actually bypass the recipient's tax ID requirement.
I saw this. They use a dummy code.
Yes.
The specific code is 898-90029A. If the postal company uses that exact code instead of your friend's personal tax ID, the package can actually clear customs.
But only under a very strict condition. All costs, including shipping and any potential duties, have to be fully prepaid by the sender.
Ah, so no surprise fees for the recipient.
Exactly. No additional expenses can be charged to the recipient upon delivery. It's a highly specific engineered exception just to keep the gears of the postal system turning for basic human interactions, like gift giving.
That is fascinating. But, tracking a single gift to a friend is one thing. Applying this massive digital net to a complex geographical zone is another. Which leads us perfectly to the next massive challenge.
Oh, definitely.
Because if you want to apply these EU-wide technical changes, you have to apply them to what the sources reveal is the most complex, idiosyncratic fiscal zone in all of Europe, the Canary Islands.
They really are Europe's ultimate customs stress test. Honestly, if a digital shipping framework can survive the Canary Islands, it can survive anywhere.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The Canary Islands are geographically closer to Africa than mainland Europe, but they are technically inside the EU customs territory.
Right.
However, they are entirely outside the EU VAT area. They are a total fiscal Galapagos.
That's a great term for it.
They don't use the standard 21% Spanish VAT that the mainland uses. They use their own local indirect tax, the IGIC.
And that local tax is incredibly nuanced. Instead of a flat rate, they use a sliding scale mechanism based on the necessity of the item.
How does that work?
So they drop taxes to absolutely 0% on things residents absolutely need to survive on a remote island, things like basic food staples or heavy hospital equipment. But they heavily tax luxury items or goods that have a negative societal impact, like tobacco at 20%, to fund their local infrastructure.
But that's just the baseline tax, right? If you are importing goods into the islands, you also get hit with a protective tariff, the AIM.
Yes, the AIEM.
And that's designed specifically to shield local Canary Island industries from being undercut by cheap global imports, and that ranges from 5 to 25%.
Exactly.
And to make the math even more complicated, customs valuation there is based on CIF cost, insurance, and freight, which means shipping costs are taxed too. You aren't just taxed on the value of the item, you are taxed on the cost of freight and insurance to get it across the ocean.
Right. Every step of the journey is monetized.
Plus, you need specific transit documents, like the T2LF, just to prove the goods actually originated in the EU, and it all has to be processed through a unique, localized digital single-window system called VXCAN.
It is a labyrinth of localized protections and specific documentation.
And I really have to push back here. I hear what you're saying about protecting local businesses, but asking a small local maker or a resident to use a highly complex digital single window just to prove their goods are from the EU sounds like an administrative nightmare.
It is difficult, yes.
Especially looking at the logistics reports showing how Brexit made UK to Canary trade a complete mess of SAD and DUA declarations. Aren't all these compounding taxes and unique digital systems just suffocating the residents and businesses located there?
Well, it certainly looks like a punishment from the outside, but it's actually by design. It's a carefully balanced ecosystem under their specific economic and fiscal regime, the REF.
Okay, explain that.
You have to look at the other side of the ledger. The islands use these complex import levies to fund local infrastructure while simultaneously offering a special canary zone, the ZEC, for businesses.
Right, I read about the ZEC.
If you are a company operating in that special zone, you pay an incredibly low 4% corporate tax rate.
Wow.
Yeah, compare that to 25% on the mainland.
Okay, so a 4% corporate tax rate is a massive carrot.
Exactly. It's a structural incentive. They're deliberately making it slightly more complex to import cheap physical goods while making it incredibly lucrative to headquarter your international business there.
Oh, I see.
They're utilizing import levies to protect local makers who face the inherent disadvantages of operating on a remote island while using the 4% tax rate to attract global capital.
Okay, so the Canary Islands show us how difficult it is to track goods just for tax purposes. But starting in 2026, the EU isn't just looking for money.
No, not at all.
They are looking for carbon emissions and security threats, which makes the Canary Island system look simple by comparison. Customs declarations are fundamentally transforming into weapons for global security, environmental protection, and honestly, trade wars.
The nature of the physical border has fundamentally changed, and 2026 is the year 3 massive new regulatory frameworks collide. First, there's the Import Control System 2, or ICS2, which we'll call the Security Framework. By February 3, 2026, this requires incredibly detailed security data to be submitted and validated before the goods are even loaded onto a ship or plane heading to the EU.
It's pre-arrival policing. If the digital paperwork isn't perfect, the physical container doesn't even get loaded.
Exactly.
But it goes beyond security to the environment. We've got the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the CBAM, essentially a carbon tax.
Yes.
Starting in 2026, importers of carbon-intensive goods like steel, cement, and fertilizers have to precisely report the carbon emissions generated during their production overseas. And by 2027, they have to purchase actual certificates to offset those emissions.
And then there is the EUDR, the deforestation regulation. This becomes mandatory on December 30th, 2026 for large companies and mid-2027 for small ones.
What does that one do?
This requires importers of products like cattle, cocoa, coffee, palm oil, and wood to prove that their products are quote-unquote deforestation-free, using exact geolocation data.
So what does this all mean for a regular business? Let's ground this in reality. Imagine you own a mid-sized coffee roastery in Madrid. How does a small importer in Spain track the exact GPS coordinates of a specific coffee bean grown on a hillside in South America?
Is a massive ask.
Or how does a local Spanish hardware store track the exact carbon output of a steel beam forged in Asia? Are we just trading tax fraud for an impossible paperwork gridlock?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the harsh reality is they can't. A small coffee roaster in Madrid simply does not have the resources to deploy satellite tracking or audit a supply chain across 3 continents.
Yeah, obviously.
And that is entirely the point of the regulation. These systems force consolidation. Small importers will be forced to buy exclusively from massive consolidated global suppliers who have the budget to deploy blockchain ledgers and strict geolocation tracking.
Oh, wow. That's huge.
For decades, global supply chains operated on a system of trust, but verify later. Now it's verified completely or the goods do not move.
Right.
Supply chain transparency is no longer a marketing buzzword that looks good on a corporate website. It is now a hard, legal requirement to cross a physical border. Logistics companies are no longer just moving boxes. They are fundamentally data management companies.
And hanging over all of this data management is the sheer geopolitical reality of the moment. Looking purely at the economic data in the July 2025 trade agreement between the U.S. and the EU, detailed in our sources, and just to be clear to you listening, we are strictly reporting the data from the sources here, not taking any political side.
Right, just looking at the raw trade number.
Exactly. We see a fascinating geopolitical chess match. The Trump administration applied a 15% tariff on EU goods. In response, the EU maintained a 0% tariff on U.S. goods, but formally committed to buying $750 billion in U.S. energy and $600 billion in U.S. investments.
That agreement drastically alters the macroeconomic flow of goods, prioritizing massive energy contracts over traditional consumer goods tariffs, and it trickles all the way down to what ships in those individual containers.
So let's bring all of these high-level regulations, all these carbon checks and geopolitical chess moves back down to your wallet. What do these 2026 changes actually look like on a standard shopping receipt for the listener?
Well, it depends entirely on what you're buying, because the new system applies tariffs based on the specific tariff classification of the goods. Let's look at the divide between textiles and electronics.
I noticed this in the sources. Let's say under the new 2026 rules, you buy an €80 jacket from overseas. Historically, Europe has a massive fashion and textile manufacturing base to protect, so the EU textile industry has been shielded by high tariffs, usually around 12 to 15%.
Right.
Because that €150 exemption is gone, that €80 jacket is going to see a very noticeable price jump at checkout.
But if you buy a digital camera for €80, the story changes completely. Europe imports the vast majority of its consumer electronics, so goods like cameras typically face very low tariffs, often between 0 and 5%. So the price increase on the camera will be minimal compared to the jacket.
It's wild how a simple shopping receipt is actually a geopolitical fingerprint. You can literally read a receipt and see exactly what industries a region is trying to protect and what its trade relationships look like. But there is a flip side to all these taxes, especially if you are a tourist.
The VAT refund system.
Yes.
If you are a non-EU listener, for example, a UK tourist visiting Spain post-Brexit, you can actually claim back the 21% Spanish VAT on your physical purchases.
But there are strict rules. The sources lay them out very clearly. You can't just buy a coffee and ask for the tax back. You must spend a minimum of €90.15 per store per day.
Yep.
You have to get a specific tax-free form stamped by customs at the airport. The goods must be totally unused in their original packaging, and you have to leave the EU with the goods within 3 months of purchase.
It is a fantastic financial benefit for travelers, but it requires diligent physical paperwork at the airport before you fly home. And I think that summarizes the entire landscape we've explored today. Navigating this new world requires understanding that quote-unquote cheap international shipping always had hidden costs. There were always environmental costs, economic costs to local businesses, and security risks. What is happening in 2026 is that the EU is finally printing those hidden costs directly on the label.
And the teleportation machine is officially being unplugged.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly complex journey through the future of global logistics, customs, and trade. But before we go, I want to leave you listening with one final provocative thought to ponder. We've just spent all this time talking about how border taxes, carbon tracking, and digital checkpoints are making the movement of physical boxes incredibly complex and expensive. But what if the future of e-commerce isn't about moving physical goods across oceans at all?
How do you mean?
What if, very soon, we stop buying the physical phone case or the plastic toy entirely? What if we just buy the digital blueprint from a designer in China or Peru and 3D print the physical product locally, right in our own homes or neighborhood print shops? By turning physical goods into pure data, we would completely bypass this massive new digital customs wall entirely. The teleportation machine wouldn't be broken. Well, actually, it would just be fully digital. Something to think about. Until next time.